Welcome to the Justin Strong Podcast, back with you for another week of recording. Here on the podcast, I am the host of the show, Justin Strong. Glad to be back with you. Glad to be joining you for a week covering Mississippi State sports, covering the world of entertainment. Eventually, we'll get into some other things. If there are any Dodger fans out there that get a hold of this podcast once the baseball season starts, I'll probably start talking about them some as well, because I'm a huge Dodger fan and they're the only pro team that I really follow that is really worth talking about at this point. But that's going to wait until the actual season starts. But for now, we have a lot to talk about in terms of the normal topics I'd cover. If you are here just for certain things, you can always check the timestamps to see where it is that you want to fast forward to check out whatever it is that you're wanting to check out. My plan for the day is to discuss Mississippi State baseball. I'm trying to get better about not saying Mississippi so fast, because it always looks weird when AI does the transcription for this. But yes, talking about Mississippi State baseball, I'll talk a little bit about the men's basketball team and their pathetic showing against South Carolina. And then I want to talk about the conclusion to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms on HBO and the first episode of Paradise. I have not watched all 3 episodes that dropped yesterday, but I did watch the first one and I want to talk about it. And it was really good, but it is set up on a lie. And I will tell you why it's set up on a lie later on. So we'll get into all that a little bit later on. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into our coverage of Mississippi State sports. We'll start with the baseball team. The baseball team is rolling right along. They played Delaware this past weekend, and they ended up sweeping the series, as we all thought they would. They ended up winning pretty comfortably on Friday night. They run-ruled Delaware on Saturday, and Sunday's game was a little bit closer. Not too bad, though. Mississippi State, I think, led throughout the entire thing. They just didn't. It was like 7-3 or something like that. I don't remember what the final score was, but it was a lot closer than the other 2 games were, and that's perfectly fine. They looked really, really good for pretty much the entire weekend. Like I said, a little bit closer than you would like for it to be on Sunday, but for the most part, this Mississippi State baseball team is doing what they should have done, what we hoped they would do, and they currently sit at 8-0 on the season, number 4 in the D1 baseball poll. There are some other polls as well that have them a little bit lower, a little bit higher. But like I said, they're performing pretty much at the level that we all thought they would. Now, this week, things start to toughen up quite a bit. The Bulldogs will take on Austin Peay tonight. They take them on, and Austin Peay is not a bad team. It's a team that Mississippi State should beat, but Austin Peay is the type of team that if they had if they won one game against an SEC opponent out of if they played 15 games in the SEC, if they won 1 or 2 games, you wouldn't be shocked. And that's kind of the type of team that Austin Peay is. So this is a really good team to play during the midweek for the Bulldogs. It's not going to just be a complete and total walkover. It should be a game that Mississippi State should win and could be a challenge, and makes the Bulldogs have to focus a little bit more and step up their game a little bit more. So that's the good part about it. The bad part about it is if you lose, it looks pretty bad, because most people won't do the research to find out just how good or how bad Austin Peay actually is. There's that part of it as well. The other part of it is Mississippi State is headed to Arlington this weekend to play in some college baseball tournament. I don't remember what it's called, but if you want to watch it, you got to sign up for Flow Sports. Done it in the past. Their broadcast is terrible, but if you really, really want to watch those games, you're going to have to sign up for Flow Sports and watch it through their service. Like I said, it's not the best. It's not the best you can spend your money on. Like if you're not getting a quality product, but you are getting what you paid for, and that is coverage of Mississippi State baseball. And like I said, that's the only way that you can watch it. But the 3 teams they're playing Arizona State, which I don't know if they're ranked or not. They might be. I'm not 100% positive, but they're the type of team that if they have the year that they are capable of having, they could be in the discussion for a potential hosting to be a potential host at the end of the season when the NCAA tournament selection is made. So that, like I said, that possibility exists for Arizona State. It just depends on what type of a season they end up having. And like I said, I don't know what they've done so far. I think they've done pretty well, but I'm not 100% positive about that. They've got Virginia Tech on Saturday. That game, State should win, but it is an ACC team, probably the second best conference in college baseball. So they should be pretty decent, but it should be a game that Mississippi State should win. And then the follow-up is the one that has the biggest buzz for the entire weekend. That's UCLA, the number one team in the D1 baseball poll. They came off a sweep of TCU, if I'm not mistaken, this past weekend. So they're playing really well. They did have a loss earlier in the season, but they're still sitting at number one in most baseball polls, despite the fact they have that one loss. And like I said, this is going to be an interesting weekend. I'll be very interested to see what Coach O'Connor does with the lineup. I'm going to be looking to see if he gets a little bit more rigid with who he puts in the lineup, if he's willing to be a little bit more if he's still willing to be patient with a few of the bats that haven't quite come along. People like Maluski, the catcher for Mississippi State, he's kind of struggled this year, and you're kind of needing him to. He was supposed to be a big part of this Mississippi State team, and as of right now, he's just not performing all that great. And so I'll be very interested to see if he continues to be put into the lineup day in and day out when you have a vast improvement in the type of opponent that you're getting ready to play this coming weekend. And then honestly, after that, you've got Southern Miss as well. So like I said, these next 5 games will tell us a lot about who Mississippi State is as we get ready to head into the SEC opener against Arkansas. And honestly, looking at the schedule, if you're wondering, where do the Bulldogs need to be by the time SEC play starts when we have that weekend against Arkansas, a team that is through about the past couple of years have really given Mississippi State a lot of trouble, and Mississippi State's had a hard time beating. Where do you need to be? Honestly, if you can get to the Arkansas series with no more than 1 or 2 losses, I think you're in pretty good shape. It would be good. Look, is it possible that Mississippi State could end up winning all of their non-conference games prior to the Arkansas series? Yes, that is very much possible. UCLA is going to be a very good team. They're ranked number 1 in the country for a reason. But that doesn't mean that they're unbeatable. As a matter of fact, every single team will go into the NCAA tournament with at least a few losses. I think the best we've ever seen the team enter the NCAA tournament was Oregon State a few years ago with like 2 or 3 losses, and that was it. But they're beatable. And Mississippi State has the talent. They have the wherewithal. They have the ability to go out and play with a UCLA team, the number 1 ranked team in the country, and they have the capability to beat those guys. Doesn't mean that they will, doesn't mean that they won't, but it is possible. Like I said, so it is possible that Mississippi State could end up undefeated, but expecting not to have a slip up between now and Arkansas is probably asking for a bit much, especially with the competition getting ready to ramp up over the next few games. It wouldn't be shocking if Mississippi State ends up with 1 or 2 losses. As long as you don't have more than 2, I think you're okay. I would love for them to get through this with just 1 loss or no losses. That would be ideal, but we'll just have to wait and see. Like I said, it's going to be hard. Baseball is just such a long and grinding sport. There's so many games that you have to play. It's just really difficult to not have a slip up here and there and and go perfect and not lose a single game. It just is. Doesn't matter how good you are or how talented you are. Most teams just can't pull out that grind, can go through that grind like what you have in a baseball season and just end up, undefeated or something along those lines, or with very, very few losses. So like I said, I'm hoping Mississippi State can get to the Arkansas series with no more than 2 losses, and that's honestly needs to be your goal. Anything less than that is great, but that should be probably your goal going into the SEC opener here in a couple of weeks. Now, I will eventually cover the softball team. I like SEC softball. I like Mississippi State softball. Softball is a really fun sport if you haven't watched it. I do try to catch it whenever Mississippi State is on TV, and I often forget, however, a lot of the times. But if you haven't watched it, the Mississippi State softball team is doing really well. They're probably going to have their best season that they've ever had. The thing that Mississippi State needs to do in softball is the one thing that they have not been able to do really for the entirety of their existence, and that is play well enough in the regular season to get one of those top 16 seeds so that they can host and not have to go on the road and play in somebody else's stadium. The only time that they have come out of a regional as a victor was a few years ago, and it looked like they were set up to go to the Women's College World Series, but they end up losing in the super regional. I don't remember who it was that they lost to, but it was a team that they probably should not have lost to. And those hopes end up getting dashed. They've been a really good team. Samantha Ricketts has done a really good job with the team since she took over. Like I said, she's just got to make that next step and get the team to a point where they can stay at home for the weekend and not have to travel on the road, because that makes it a lot more difficult. I mean, there's a reason why Mississippi State fans in baseball are always asking Kendall Rogers, are we hosting? Because hosting makes it so much easier to get out of that first weekend in the NCAA tournament and get to the Super and then on to the College World Series. And the problem that Mississippi State has is SEC softball is even more loaded than SEC baseball is. There was a couple of years ago, Vanderbilt does not play in softball. So they had 13 teams in the SEC, and all 13 teams made it to the NCAA tournament. That's how stacked and how loaded some of these teams are. And it got even worse when you added Texas and Oklahoma. Oklahoma is probably the premier softball program in the country. They've won multiple national titles. They've been an absolute juggernaut ever since, I don't know, for a long time. I don't know how long, but it's been a while that they've been just on top of the college softball world. So like it didn't get any easier when those two schools joined the conference. So Mississippi State has to find a way to compete and be at the top of their game against all of these really difficult SEC opponents. And if they can do that, then they can find their way into a hosting argument. Then things start to open up for them, and the potential for this team starts to open up quite a bit in terms of possibly making it to the College World Series that's played every year in Oklahoma City. So, like I said, I would love for them to find a way to get past this hump that they've never really been able to get over. We'll see if they can do it this year. This is probably the best team that Samantha Ricketts has had, and she's got probably her best opportunity to do that and to possibly be, one of those top 16 seeds, maybe even if they do well enough in the SEC play, if they can, like I said, overcome some of those hurdles that they've not been able to overcome in the past, become a top 8 seed and guarantee yourself a hosting situation all the way through the College World Series. We'll see if they can do it. I don't know. The men's basketball team, I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. It's really disappointing. Mississippi State has this great game from Josh Hubbard on Wednesday night last week against Auburn. They have an inspired performance in which they fought, and they, despite the fact that in the second half, things got dicey for them, they still fought through it, and they ended up winning the game. And then they go on the road on Saturday and just lay an absolute dud of a game and end up losing to South Carolina, easily the worst team in the SEC. This is the type of thing that I was talking about. Can this team, who is not having a very good year, go out and beat the teams at the bottom of the conference? And for the most part, that's the one thing that they had done in this basketball season. But unfortunately, on Saturday, they reverted back to some really bad tendencies. Josh Hubbard did not have a good game. Coming off easily the best game of his career, he has probably the worst game of his career. And we've talked about this before. If Josh Hubbard is not playing at his best, if he's not able to carry this team has no chance. Now, the one thing that was going well for them, and the one thing that was kind of keeping them in the game in the first half, Jay Nips was kind of stepping up and filling in that Josh Hubbard role and was doing a really good job of that throughout the course of the game. But then he gets injured and he can't return to the lineup. And they didn't have any scoring. They didn't have any really good scoring options at that point. At this point, the Bulldogs were basically done. They had no way to score, and they ended up losing the game to South Carolina. Look, this season, you're just doing your best to try to get through it. You want to get to the end. You'd like to be right around 500. If you can find a way to put some wins together and maybe get to the NIT tournament, that would be great. It's getting to the NIT tournament is not as important as it used to be. It used to be for teams that were young and had a lot of pieces returning for the following year. I think of that 1994 Mississippi State basketball team. They were a very young team, and they returned a lot of those same pieces from the 94 team to the 95 team to the 96 team. And that NIT tournament, even though they only played one game against Colorado that year, and they end up losing that game, that that extra bit of experience, that extra bit of time together, that extra bit of practice time helped them propel them into their 1995 Sweet 16 run and eventually into their 1996 Final Four run. So, like I said, getting to the NIT isn't as big of a deal anymore, just because how many of these guys are going to be on the team next year? Hubbard should be there. King Grace and all these other guys that they kind of brought in, you're hoping that they remain and they stay with the team. But there's going to be guys who leave and enter the transfer portal. There's going to be guys that they're going to have to bring in. So, like I said, even if it's a young team that has a lot of pieces that will return the following year, getting to the NIT tournament doesn't necessarily mean that the Bulldogs will have that same nucleus there next year, regardless of how old or young the team actually is. So I would still just like to see them end on a high note, but when you lose to South Carolina, even though it was on the road, it's still disappointing. That's a team you got to beat. It just is. It's a team you should beat, and they just laid an absolute egg. So, all right, let's move on to more fun topics. That is the topics of entertainment. I want to talk about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It wrapped up on Sunday night. I thought the conclusion was really good. It followed very much a typical Game of Thrones type of season. The biggest noise that you get in the season happens in the penultimate episode, with episode 5, where you had the trial of 7 in episode 5, where you had the big battle. That was a really epic scene that we got between those characters, between Sir Dunk and Aerion, I think is the Targaryen that he was pitted up against. I thought that was a really great episode, but I thought this was a very fitting finale. A lot of reflection taking place amongst a lot of our characters. Sir Dunk, obviously at the top of that, he is having to ask himself a lot of questions about who he is, why he's the one that was left standing out of all this, the ramifications for the fact that Baelor ends up dying in the trial of 7. He's killed by his brother Maekar. Like I said, I thought there was a lot of really well done things in this. I like the fact that Dunk isn't just real enthusiastic about the prospect of being being the knight for Aegon's squire. I like the fact that he's really having a lot of doubt about that. But once he starts to think about it, he wants to have the influence. He wants to have a good influence on Aegon that he feels like Aegon would not have anywhere else, and hopefully be able to mold him into something better. But Maekar obviously wants nothing to do with it. And then we find out at the end that Aegon has, despite the fact that his father is not for this, has run away again and has told Sir Dunk that his father is okay with it. And Dunk foolishly just like, okay, that's fine. If your dad's changed his mind, that's great. Then come with me. So very interested to see what they do in the second season. I want to talk about the second season in a little bit, but we should get it about a year from now. So that's exciting. We're not going to have to wait 2 or 3 years for this thing to get a second season. The other show that I want to talk about is Paradise. I have not seen all 3 episodes of the premiere for season 2. I only watched the first episode yesterday, and like I said, I haven't had a chance to watch all 3. The first season was really good at Paradise. I came to it late. I ended up watching it probably 6 or 7 months after it actually finished up and wrapped up. But the second season, I knew it was coming out on February 23rd, so I made sure to carve out some time to at least get 1 episode in, and it's really good. The premiere, it's an interesting and a risky method that they use to premiere this season of television, because season 1 ends with Xavier, played by Sterling K. Brown, getting on a plane to fly to Atlanta and try to track down his wife, who he has learned survived the apocalyptic nightmare, the super volcano destroying, and the super volcano erupting and decimating the population of the earth, and the nuclear onslaught being basically put down by the president because he ended up releasing a giant EMP that disabled all of the electronics of the world. So he was on a hunt to search for his wife, and that's the last image that we get, is him in a plane getting ready to take off, going out of a hangar. And season 2, we learn about these 2 new characters who are going to be the 2 primary characters that they introduce to us and give us here in season 2. That is Anna, played by Shailene Woodley, and Link, who is played by Thomas Doherty. interesting that Thomas Doherty's character is not his real name. We don't learn his real name. He goes by Link. And look, there's a lot of things about this episode that just were checking off boxes left and right for me that made it just really enjoyable for me. One, first and foremost, where I live is a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee. When I saw the title of Graceland, I was like, I wonder if this is going to be a play on words. No, they actually go to Graceland in this. Now, I looked this up to make sure. I was like, there is no way that they actually went to Graceland and filmed this, and they did not. There was no way that the Presley estate was going to allow them to go into Graceland and film and possibly, tear up the estate of Elvis Presley for this television show that they wanted to film. But I've been to Graceland 2 times, only twice. I didn't go until my late 30s, if I remember correctly. My wife is an engineer for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, which is the local utility company in Memphis. And they were doing a event like I said, it was probably around 10 years ago. And they were doing an event there, and we got free tours to go see Graceland. And I'd never been. And we decided to go ahead and go. Look, I felt like eventually I'd go to Graceland. Like I said, I live in Memphis. I live in a suburb of Memphis. My grandfather is a mechanic, and he owned a shop, a local Firestone, that was about a mile away from Graceland. He was actually Elvis's mechanic for most of his life. So, like I said, eventually I felt like I would eventually make it to Graceland. But I was really impressed by the fact that the recreation they have of Graceland is almost spot on. I mean, it is almost identical. But if you walk into Graceland today, it's going to look almost exactly like what you see. I mean, I haven't been enough to know if there were anything that they didn't get right, but like I said, it looked exactly like what you see when you go into Graceland. So kudos to the people who put this together and got this episode together. Like I said, they did a really, really good job. And I also love the fact that basically, because of the fact that the TV room and the billiard room are basically a bunker built underground in Graceland, this allows Shailene Woodley's character, and I can't remember the other lady's name in this, but it basically allows them to survive this post-apocalyptic event because they can go down to what's basically a fallout shelter that's built beneath Graceland, just because of the way that Elvis had that built so many years ago. Like I said, it's kind of a low-key genius thing that they did. But I'm here to tell you that the entire premise of this episode, though, is built upon a lie. Because if you go to Graceland today, and I double checked to make sure that this is still the case, and it is, if you go to Graceland, you don't have a tour guide. Well, you do have a tour guide, but you don't have a normal tour guide in the sense that basically like they are presenting in the show. In the show, Shailene Woodley's character is a tour guide, and this is kind of how she finds purpose in life, and it kind of is a big part of what makes your character who she is. If you go to Graceland today and you take a tour of Graceland, they give you an iPad with a strap that you can put around your neck, and you're holding this iPad and you put on headphones, and none other than probably the most famous Elvis fan in the world, John Stamos, is directing you and giving you your tour through this iPad. There are no live people giving tours or acting as tour guides in Graceland. So the entire premise of the first episode of Paradise is all based on a lie, because there is nobody who would have that job of tour guide in Graceland that would be doing what she's doing in that episode. It just wouldn't. It doesn't exist. Like I said, this is John Stamos erasure. We can't stand for this, Disney and Hulu. Disney especially. John Stamos was a main character, Uncle Jesse, on your network ABC, and you're erasing him from Graceland. How can you do this to one of your most beloved people, one of your most beloved characters that you've ever had? How can you do this to John Stamos? It's just not right. But I'm kidding about all that, obviously. But yeah, I was very, when I was sitting there watching, it's like, I just could not put that out of my mind. Like, this wouldn't actually happen because of the fact that they don't have tour guides in Graceland. It's all done by iPad nowadays. So anyway, like I said, I just thought it was funny. I just thought it was an interesting aspect, but it was a really good episode. It really was. Like I said, the fact that we were focusing on Anna and Link throughout the course of this entire first episode is really interesting. I'll be very interested to see what they do. And they give us, the way that they're going to tie it in to the rest of the series, where we find Xavier's plane has crashed and she comes across the wreckage and his body. Obviously, he's probably still alive. I imagine they're not going to kill the main character of the show here in the first episode of season 2. But we'll see. Like I said, I haven't seen episode 2 or 3 yet. I'm sure they'll get into her like nursing him back to health or whatever. But I'll be very interested to see how they play this out, because, like I said, we spent the entirety of season 1, except for flashbacks, in the bunker in Colorado, and now we're going outside of it. And I'll be very interested to see how the rest of this plays out. Like I said, thought it was a really good first episode. Really nice little twist there at the end. It like just kind of goes along with episode 1 of season 1, where you get the big twist at the end of it, where they reveal that everything's taking place inside this giant bunker. So, like I said, I thought it was really good. I'm very interested to see what they do going forward. Now, one other thing I want to talk about before we sign off is the state of television, because I think it's very interesting that Paradise is coming out basically a year after season 1 came to an end. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is the second season will likely come out right about the same time next year. So we're getting shows back-to-back years on streaming services, and this just doesn't happen very often. I mean, we see now with The Pitt is about halfway through season 2. It basically came out right about the same time as season 1 did this year. I'm very, very interested to see if we're getting back to this idea that TV shows shouldn't take 3 years to complete and have your characters basically completely grow up if they're children. I'll be very interested if we're finally getting back to this, because it's not really sustainable, especially for shows like Stranger Things and other shows that rely on younger characters. Percy Jackson is kind of understanding that and going through it as well. They immediately started filming season 3 as soon as season 2 was done. So I'm very interested to see if we get to a point where we're trying not to have these just massive gaps in seasons of television, because I feel like we're eventually going to go back to the old way of doing television. I really do. I think most people prefer having a show that they can count on being there for them 22, 23 weeks of the year, and just being there for them at the same time every single night, each week, and just being available for you. Like I said, that was something that you could always count on when we were growing up, whenever we were watching on network television. And then once the summer came along, you just knew that it wasn't there. You would go watch movies, you would go on vacation, and that's what would basically take up your summer. And then come September, October, you got new seasons of television. And that feels like the way TV should be. It feels like the way TV always should have been. But we've decided to make TV shows on movie scale budgets, give us shorter seasons, and make the gap between the seasons even longer. Look, you get really good television shows. You really do. Apple has produced some great television shows, but it took nearly 4 years for Severance to come out with a season 2. It might take the same amount of time to get a season 3 of Severance. Like I said, I just don't know. I don't know if I hope and pray that we're getting back to what normal TV should be. That is my hope and my prayer. I don't know. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but I would love for that to be the case. I would love to know that if I watch a show ends in it starts in January of one year and ends in March of the same year, that we can kind of expect that same show to come back January to March the following year. Like I said, we've got a few shows that do that, that are kind of close to that, but we don't have an abundance of them. So I would really love to see if we can get back to that, because like I said, I like the fact that we got Paradise last year and we're coming back to it a year later. Same thing for The Pitt. Same thing for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I would love to be able to see that. I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case, but I hope it is. So we'll see. All right, guys, it's getting kind of close to time for me to go to work and start my actual job. So I'm going to sign off there. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And until next time.